Okay, Daniel. Just a little story to begin with. We love to go to Papa's on Cleethorpes Pier. They do gluten-free fish and chips. And Maggie and I went there once, and Maggie was fulfilling her duties, which is she was inspecting all the shops to make sure they were up to standard. And I was walking down the prom, and I was approached by two lovely young women who had turned out to be Mormon missionaries. And believe it or not, they were on an 18-month mission trip to Grimsby. Now, that's dedication, isn't it? And I thought, well, there's no point in arguing over words. I just chose to show them love. And we were in the conversation, and one of them said, "We don't meet many people like you." And then she said, "What?" Well, one of them said, "What's your favorite Bible story? Who's your favorite Bible character?" And I said, "Daniel." And one of the girls said enthusiastically, "Yes, my favorites are his three friends." And she couldn't remember their names. We'll come back to that part of the story a little bit later on. We're just looking about who Daniel was and his character and his personality. We're not looking beyond chapter 6, where we would leave that to somebody who's got far more brain power than me. Can I just... That's a bit better. And I'm not going to look at timescales, but I would recommend Ian's absolutely wonderful study that he's produced on Daniel. And he's got about a wonderful chart there about various kings and various other things that were happening included in the time that we're talking about, along with a lot of background to the whole exile, the power of Nebuchadnezzar, the fall of the house of Judah, etc. So if you haven't read that, I would very much recommend you read it. It is absolutely excellent. And I think what Ian's doing is a fantastic resource for the church. Yeah, he's done 3 and there's several more to go, but it's building up a real fantastic library. And, it's just a great resource. So thank you, Ian, for doing all those things. Right. Previously, we've had Adam and Anna talk about a couple of different characters from the Old Testament. And they used sort of cartoon illustrations, didn't they? Well, we're going way beyond that this morning. Way beyond it. And this will be of particular interest probably to Paul and to Adi. Right? Because there's been some very, very recent, in fact, so very recent, I bet Adam doesn't even know about them. Very recent discoveries. And they were discovered in a cave by the rivers of Babylon. And there's some extremely rare and very, very early photographs. Yeah. Now, you can imagine after 2,500 years, they're not fantastic quality, but bear with me, and I'm sure you'll appreciate it. Could we have number 1? Right. There we go. That's a picture of the 4 young men eating vegetables. One of them's got a smoothie. There you can see. Probably the experts reckon taken by Ashpenaz, who was looking after him at that time. Number 2, that's probably taken by one of his pals, showing what Daniel did at least 3 times a day. And we'll talk about that a little bit later too. And this next one is probably the most remarkable one of all. Experts say that this could have only been taken by Nebuchadnezzar himself. Yeah, as he looked into the furnace and saw 4 men, and the 4th looking like a son of God. And the last one, photographer unknown. But there is in the lion's den, even after years of faithful service to Nebuchadnezzar and the cruel court that he lived in, but service more to God, he was thrown into the lion's den. Now, they didn't have any iPhones in those days. They just used the tablets. I was a bit worried about that last one because I'm not sure whether it would, but thank you. He had a long and impressive career as a civil servant in a foreign court. And if he needed a CV, it would have looked mightily impressive. Along with his friends, Daniel was trained in the ways and customs of the Babylonian court. And this would involve rubbing shoulders with magicians and enchanters and being surrounded by the occult. In fact, he was included with them in the king's fury that all the wise men of Babylon were to be killed. We read that in chapter 2. And it made me wonder how many of us are rubbing shoulders with today's musicians and enchanters. And how do we cope? Are we eating only vegetables, as it were? Or are we eating from the table of this corrupt and corrupting world we're living in, which is so very, very easy? So how did Daniel cope? How did he not just cope, but rise above his contemporaries? There are, I believe, two outstanding characteristics that we want to just home in on this morning that Daniel exhibited. And the first characteristic is Daniel was a man of prayer. Now, if we're not careful, this is where we could sort of blank off a little bit. Here we go again. Another well-meaning but ultimately guilt-ridden talk on why we should be praying more. Oh, yeah. I know. But just ask yourself one question. Why would I want to shout and try to attract God's attention when I can sit on his knee and whisper in his ear? Why would I want to shout and try and attract God's attention when I can sit on his knee and whisper in his ear? We've already seen that Daniel prayed 3 times a day and more as we read further on. And he'd done this for many, many years. Just a few quotes regarding what I think is the necessity of prayer. First one. To be a Christian without prayer is no more possible than to be alive without breathing. That's from Martin Luther, everybody's Reformation hero. And now, yeah. Is prayer your steering wheel or your spare tire? Corrie ten Boom. And I'm sure we've all been inspired by the story of her life. The only hope of salvation from the delusions and heresies, the innovations and traps of wicked people, and of all and of the devil, is prayer. Now, this is somebody we've all heard of, isn't it? I'm not sure I could even pronounce his name. Greek Orthodox monk, but I was very impressed by that quotation. There has never been a spiritual awakening in any country or locality that did not begin in united prayer. And one that none of us can be unfamiliar with because we've read it in the Bible. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And some pretty, we could make bookmarks out of some of those phrases, couldn't we? And open our Bible and we see that, yeah. Is prayer your steering wheel or your spare tire? Well, but essentially, we need to be praying. There isn't a finger-pointing exercise designed to make us feel condemned. It's a call to the faithful, and that's us, isn't it? And to connect with the one who is completely trustworthy, faithful, and powerful, and longs to be in conversation with every one of us. And you can be saying, well, I'm not worthy. Yeah, that's right. But you're in a very big club. But we've been made worthy because of Jesus. I'm not very good at it. I tend to fall asleep. Let's be honest. It does happen. Well, then keep trying. Maybe different times of the day. Maybe alter your priorities. Well, I don't know what to pray. Then start with Our Father in heaven. That's a great prayer. We were only talking about that this morning. You know, we could spend a long time talking and thinking and praying about that, and it would change our lives. Pray on your own, pray with your spouse, pray with your home group, pray with your church, but pray. Isn't it? Before Nigel puts this up, just takes a little bit of reading. But when you read it, please don't feel, oh no, right? It's another phrase to condemn us. It's a phrase to encourage us, right? And it shows what prayer can and does do. Okay. No prayer, no faith, no Christ in the heart. Little prayer, little faith, little Christ in the heart. Increasing prayer, increasing faith, increasing Christ in the heart. Much prayer, much faith, much Christ in the heart. Praying always, faith always, Christ always. That could be a bookmark, couldn't it? I should have made one. Daniel's expectation and experience of God moving in answer to prayer, I believe, was extremely high. And I've just included a couple of examples from our own experience. There's a sign in our kitchen that says, expect a miracle. Now, it's not a comment on Maggie's cooking. No, it's not. It's not a comment on Maggie's cooking. I'm on safe ground. It's all right. Am I? Oh, yeah. But we found it after a not so coincidental meeting and conversation that we had with someone in town. This is going back quite a number of months. And after that conversation, Maggie was sure that God was going to do something. And we prayed, and our expectation of God answering prayer was very high. A few months went past, and that particular situation was totally and utterly resolved, to the absolute delight of a huge number of people. Answered prayer. A few months ago, we met a family that were in real trouble, and they were really suffering for it. We told them that we would pray for them, believing that God would do something. And we were really asking God for a dramatic and comprehensive intervention. In less than a week, 90% of their situation had been resolved. I don't believe in coincidence, but I do believe in the power of prayer. Answered prayer. We've had a strange week in many ways. We had the absolutely glorious and wonderful experience of our son marrying his beautiful Emily on Saturday. And we sang, one of the songs we sang was 10,000 Reasons. On the Tuesday, we went to a funeral. And one of the songs we sang there was 10,000 Reasons. But it was a trek over to Lancashire for somebody that we'd not seen for well over 30 years. But we both really felt that we should be a part of that service. He was one of the lads in our youth group that we ran back in Lancashire some decades ago. And there's an amazing story, which I won't tell you, about going collecting a motorbike that he asked me to collect with him. I'm going to tell you. And this is a brief version. And he had this BMW motorbike that he was only 18 at the time, and he was absolutely delighted with it. He went on this touring holiday in France, and he fell off the road and broke his bike. And so he asked me if I'd go and collect it with him, just, again, to cut the story down. So I said, well, where is it? He said, oh, it's just into France. It's not very far. He said, just into France. I mean, he was right. It was just into France if you were coming from Spain. So that was Graham. But what was a real thrill was that he lived a life for Jesus. We lost contact and didn't know. You don't know, do you? All these people that you meet many years ago, you're never sure. But he loved Jesus all his life, died very suddenly. But talking of bookmarks, they produced a bookmark, and I'd like just to read a little bit of what it says on the front, and it does reflect into our look at prayer this morning. It says, a devout Christian commander in the 91st Infantry Brigade gave each soldier a card with the 91st Psalm printed on it before the brigade entered combat in Europe. The soldiers agreed to recite the psalm daily. The 91st Brigade fought in 3 of the bloodiest battles of World War I and did not suffer a single combat-related casualty. Impressive, isn't it? God hears when we speak. He wants to hear. Daniel had developed a really deep reliance on God, and a God who sustained him, spared his life, and enabled him to live in the world, but not of it. In a very corrupt and corrupting world that he lived in, that he was educated into, he still didn't become a part of it in the sense that he was absorbed into all those things. He knew that relationship with God that was more vital. Before Jesus spoke, before Jesus ever spoke to his disciples, in John 15:5, Daniel knew that he was, and that apart from God, he could do nothing, which is what that verse says. Yet, with the knowledge and relationship that God was in his life, he was able to bear testimony that with God, all things are possible. Now, back to the story of the Mormon missionaries. One of them didn't know the name of Daniel's pals. It's only another 28 sheets. But the 4 men, Daniel and his friends, were given alternative names, weren't they? And Babylonian policy was to give captives new Babylonian names. This was an attempt to assimilate them into their culture and to forget who they were and where they came from. Every good theologian's friend, Matthew Henry, says this: all their original Hebrew names had something of God in them. To make them forget God, the God of their fathers, the guide of their youth, they were given names that reflected Chaldean idolatry. So Daniel essentially means God is my judge. He was given the name Belteshazzar, which one of the meanings is keeper of the hidden things of Bel, which is a major Babylonian god. Hananiah, Yahweh is gracious, given Shadrach. Plus, one of the meanings, under the command of Aku, the Babylonian moon god. Mishael, who is like God, given Meshach, who is like Aku. Azariah, the Lord helps, given Abednego, slave of the god Nebo, the Babylonian god of learning. And they're all, I think, just cynical corruptions of their given names, which spoke of who they were in God. Second characteristic, and the one that I couldn't get away from in all the preparation, I'm saying, Lord, I think I should be doing this, because you're allowed to talk to God in some ways like that. I think I should be doing this. That's all right, son, but I'd really like you to do that. Yeah, but this is pretty good, isn't it? Yeah, it's pretty good, but I'd like you to do that. I remember a story of Jeff Lucas, and he was on the platform, and he prepared this message. And when he was up there, God said to him, "No, I want you to speak this." And he argued with God, and he ended up saying, "I'm not going to do that because my message is better than yours." It ended up not being true, funnily enough. In spite of Daniel being surrounded by such a corrupt and corrupting world, being given other and much different names, Daniel knew who he was. This knowledge, along with the life of prayer, enabled Daniel to live in such a corrupt culture, with its daily pressures to conform. Pressures sometimes of expectation, sometimes of obligation. I find it interesting that apart from the initial mention of a change of name, we never read of Belteshazzar, only Daniel. And today, we are constantly given different names to the one through Jesus that God has given us. All right, in the world, we're constantly intimidated, bombarded with things like not good enough, failure, good for nothing. You're just like your father, just like your mother. People are laughing there. You will never change. Or as I was challenged recently, what? You don't like Taylor Swift? But these are only a few things. And I know some of us laugh just like your father or mother, whatever it is. But they register, don't they? Oh, yeah, yeah. You may not be told you're a failure. Some of us in this room have been. You may not be told good for nothing, but some people have. You'll never change. That's a big one. I don't know about Taylor Swift, but these are challenges that we face every day. These are names that are given to us every day, subtly sometimes very, very overtly. We could all think of our own list of names, implying identity that we're given on a daily basis. But what happens every time that we receive one of these new names? We can agree, well, yeah, I suppose that's just how I am. Yeah, that's the family characteristic. My dad was like that. Or really, I suppose my expectations have been too high and I shouldn't really expect things to change. But who does God say that we are? And what is his name for us? But now, this is what the Lord says. He who created you, Jacob, he who formed you, Israel, do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have summoned you by name. You are mine. God calls us his own. Our place in the heart of God is without parallel. Secure, completely loved, highly valued. Bob Goff has already been mentioned this morning, and here he is again. 3 little quotes from him. We don't need to do anything else to be God's masterpiece. We are already his masterpiece. We are all at the top of God's list. We all cross the finish line in first place. It's not possible for God to love us any more than he already does. Think about that. It's not possible for God to love us any more than he already does. Do we think that he loves us because he should? Because he's obliged to do? He has said it, so I suppose he'll have to love me, in spite of knowing what I'm actually like. But the truth of it is, we are loved. And once God has loved us, he carries on loving us. And then after he's done that, he loves us again. It's interesting that we read that God has to be provoked to anger, but we never read that he has to be provoked to love. I'll try and say that like I should have said it first time. We read that God has to be provoked to anger, but we never read that he has to be provoked to love, because that's who he is. Of all the characteristics of God, the fact that he is love is the one that we read about. John Bunyan, Pilgrim's Progress, said this: love in him is essential to his being. God is love. Christ is God. Therefore, Christ is love. Love naturally. He may as well cease to be as cease to love. These are great quotes, aren't they? Just looking at one of the verses that we read often, but hopefully in this context has a little bit more meaning. It's from Ephesians 3. And it says, I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power together with all the Lord's holy people to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. It's not just a sort of cool academic phrase. That's something of the passionate heart of God for each one of us. I, along with Steve and Trevor and one or two others, go to the Nettle and Men's Breakfast. And a few months ago, one of the speakers there was a chap he was the vicar at St. Lawrence's in Saxelby. And he recommended a few books. And one of the books he recommended was this one, Gentle and Lowly, by a chap called Dale Ortland. And I thought, until I read this book, I thought, well, that's interesting title. We'll get it, borrowed it off somebody. They've not got it back yet. But until I read that book, I thought I knew who I was in God. And I thought I knew how much God loved me. That just blew that all away. Has anybody actually read it? Yeah? You know what it's like, don't you? It's awesome. Absolutely awesome. And I never really believed that, but somewhere back here, you think, well, God has a sort of cool indifference and a sort of obligation. But the truth is, he delights in each and every one of us, just as we are right now. We can't perform. We live in a performance society, don't we? We can't perform to get him to love us anymore. We can't become better so that he can show more of his love to us. And he is not looking down on us in frustration and disappointment. Look at that. They've done it again. I knew they would. They've just done it. That is not happening, folks. God doesn't look at us like that. A quote from the book. The battle of the Christian life is to bring your own heart into alignment with Christ's. That is, getting up each morning and replacing your natural orphan mindset with a mindset of full and free adoption into the family of God through the work of Christ, your older brother, who loved you and gave himself for you out of the overflowing fullness of his gracious heart. The sweep of the New Testament teaching is that it is the Son, S-U-N, it is the Son of Christ's heart, not the clouds of my sin, that now defines me. And in a performance-based world, it's extremely difficult to be completely free of thinking that God will improve of us. God will improve of us. Stay with me, we'll get it. That God will approve us or love us more once we get it right. Just listen to how Jesus comes to us. I've really messed it up. You don't understand, we say. I know, Jesus responds. Yes, well, you know most of it, more than others see, but deep inside there's a blackness that is hidden. I know it all, Jesus responds. The thing is, it's not just my past, it's the present too. I understand. But I don't know if I can break free from it at any time soon. You're the only kind of person I'm here to help. The burden is too heavy, getting heavier all the time. Then let me carry it. It's too much to bear. Jesus says, not for me. You don't get it. My sins aren't directed at others. They're directed at you. Then I am the one more suited to forgive them. But the more ugliness you discover in me, the sooner you will get fed up with me. Whoever comes to me, I will never cast out. Daniel, a man of prayer and sure conviction, didn't have the relationship with God the same way that we do, through the Lord Jesus. But he knew he was greatly loved and valued. In a chapter that we're not looking at, chapter 10, The angel says to him, "O man, highly regarded and greatly loved, do not be afraid." And in another translation, it says, "Don't be afraid. You are treasured by God."